welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to Tales from the Crypt. I'm so happy to have you all back here with me. This is episode 5, and I need your help. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you love about this channel, what you don't love about this channel, what you wish I would include, your thoughts on me moving to an audio-only podcast format, meaning away from YouTube. So please leave your thoughts in the comments or email them to me at tftcsub@gmail.com. I cannot wait to hear from you. Moving on, tonight you will hear about a cursed object, a job that involves some patrons who insist on hanging around, and the ultimate motivator for those chores that you've been putting off. Ready or not? Here we go. The candelabra that started it all. Growing up, we lived in a 2-story home. My sister and I once found a candelabra in a silver frame with a picture of the Virgen de Guadalupe. The frame had little roses all around it, and the candelabra had 3 candle holders. The longest one in the middle had the face of evil, with its tongue hanging out. We took it to our mom, and she put it in a paper bag, told us to go wash our hands, and we took it to our Mama Grande. She looked at it with a little fear and took it out to the woods and buried it. She told us if we ever find anything like that again, we shouldn't touch it with our hands. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my trauma. My sister and I shared a bedroom. We had our twin beds side by side because I was afraid of the dark. She was asleep and her back was turned to me. I was trying to go to sleep on my back. After a few hours, I heard a noise, like a dragging noise, going across the floor. I was wide awake. All of a sudden, I felt this hand fall on me, a big, long, bony hand. I managed to pick up my hand and touch the bony fingers. It scared me so much that I started praying. I couldn't move at all from the fear, just little jolts in my body. That was the beginning of the black figure I would see now and then in that house. Years of trauma laid ahead. The Phantom of the Dance Floor. I grew up loving ghost hunting shows, horror movies, stuff about aliens, all of it. As I became a teenager, I became more skeptical and scientific-minded about it. I still loved those shows, but I began thinking none of it was real. I was 18 and figured if I'd never seen anything supernatural by now, I never would. Out of high school, I started working at a local concert venue with a checkered history. Opening in the 1920s as a movie theater, it also catered to vaudeville shows and served as a speakeasy at one point. Eventually, in the 1960s or 70s, they cleared the projectors out and used the stage behind the silver screen to put on concerts. The place was massive, yet claustrophobic. A row of 10 doors led onto a huge foyer. Darkly painted fixtures and carvings encroached. On the left, a grand staircase split off parallel to the foyer, arching over the office and kitchen. On the right, 2 huge doorways led into the concert hall. Once inside the main hall, those doorways flanked a bar area which always smelled of bitters and mildewed spilled beer. 3 levels of dance floor advanced downward to the stage. On the right was a door leading up to a ramp to the backstage area and the dressing rooms. The soundboard and dressing rooms were all stage left, as was the load-in door where the roadies and lesser-known bands would load their gear in. Looking out from the stage, more carvings and fixtures pressed in on the room. There were catwalks and organ lofts full of old stage rigging. The backstage dressing rooms were up a set of metal stairs bolted to the side of the thick cement walls. There was a balcony that seated 250 overlooking the dance floors and stage. Above all, there was a huge chandelier. The manager used to walk around telling us all the known ghost stories. She would point to a wall, we'd follow the wall around the corner and another corner, until we realized that this section of wall must contain a 10-foot deep hollow spot. What was in there? Liquor from the speakeasy days, cash, the bodies of rival mobsters. These hollow walls were everywhere in the venue. They were supposedly underground walkways that led from the speakeasy to the old brothel and to the city hall. And what about the ghosts? What about a little girl people would see on the stairs? What about the blood stain near the exit, the one that always came back no matter how hard you scrubbed? What about the strange reflections in the dark mirror at the top of the stairs? My friend, let's call him John, got me a job there setting up for shows in the day and bouncing at night. It was a great job just out of high school. We'd see bands we liked, then party all night once the shows let out. We'd hate on bands like Foreigner, whose writer list was a mile long and demanded exotic fruit that wasn't available in our area. We'd hang out with Dave Mustaine as he told his crew to walk behind me, roadie. We'd marvel at classics like Zapp and Roger and Earth, Wind and Fire, and we'd rock out to King Diamond, Machine Head, and Danzig. But before the shows, it was just me and John, prepping the venue, loading in kegs and booze, filling ice trays, stocking the backstage rooms and bathrooms. Boring stuff. We'd load a bin full of ice and beer and food, walk it from the kitchen under the stairs, through the large doors, past the bar, down the 3 dance floors, up the stage door ramp, and up 3 flights of stairs to the dressing rooms. During setup, the whole place was on lockdown. Chains and padlocks were wrapped around all the handles on the double doors. The stage doors were chained and padlocked. The only way in or out of the whole place was under the stairs and out the office, all the way at the front of the building. On one of the tedious trips hauling beer up to the dressing rooms, John and I were near the dance floor closest to the stage. We both looked up at the same time. Not 10 feet in front of us was a man with his back to us. He wore a cape and wide-brimmed hat with, of all things, a feather perched up in it. He dashed up through the stage door. John and I looked at each other, knowing no one else could be in the building, and certainly no one dressed the way this man was. "Did you see?" we both blurted out at the same time. "Guy looked like he was in Phantom of the Opera?" John said. I nodded and we both ran after him. After all, our other job was security. We ran up the ramp behind the stage door. The exit was chained and padlocked, so he could only have run backstage. We ran through the door and looked around the stairwell. It was empty. The stage was empty. The backstage door padlocked. Nowhere for him to go. Nothing there. Where the hell could he have gone? We did our due diligence and checked that he hadn't jumped off the stage and run through the office. We checked the dressing rooms. There was only a tiny window 3 flights up. I suppose he could have shimmied down the tree next to the window, but there was no way a large man in full costume was crawling through that tiny window. We were trying to convince ourselves that this was a full-grown man that had somehow escaped us. Looking at that tiny window and realizing there was no way for him to get out, John and I both knew he hadn't gotten out of the building. He had just disappeared. We stopped trying to convince ourselves that the man in the costume was really a man at all. We didn't know what he was, but the word we settled on was ghost. The Projector Room. After seeing a full-bodied apparition, I was firmly back in the believers' camp. I had no explanation for what John and I saw. We told the owner and manager that we had seen a ghost, but neither one was surprised. Was it the little girl? No. Was it the gangster? No. It was a guy dressed up like Phantom of the Opera. This seemed to surprise them. They were familiar with the ghosts they saw regularly. They were familiar with stories they had been told by the previous owners. None of them saw the ghost that John and I saw running through the backstage door only to disappear. We would muse on that later, but in the meantime we had work to do. We went about our normal routine, stocking the bar and bathrooms and dressing rooms. We were upstairs hitting the bathrooms, which were white and brightly lit during the day. They were the brightest spot in the whole building, and walking out of them left us a little blind while our eyes adjusted to the dingy darkness of the vestibule. The corbels were all adorned with different faces staring down at us from above. They were especially creepy, even with the thin daylight filtering in from beneath the bathroom doors. Beyond the bathrooms were a set of double doors leading to the balcony. If you swung a left before entering the balcony, you'd find a small door that was almost invisible in the dark antechamber that never saw the light of day. This door led to the projector room, a place I hadn't yet been. The bartender, let's call him Lars, was a good friend of the owner, and he was allowed to live in the projector room. As the bartender, he was up late and often slept through a good portion of the day, although sleep is a rather loose term. As our eyes were still adjusting to the darkness outside the bathrooms, we heard Lars screaming, "Leave me alone! Leave me alone! Just let me sleep! Let me sleep!" I looked at John, who told me to let it go. Lars was just yelling at the ghosts. I was confused and terrified. What do they do to keep him awake? Yell at him, shake his bed, turn the lights on and off. When I think of ghosts, I think of fleeting apparitions. Something with a time or energy limit that has to go away when those limits are reached. How could there be ghosts so powerful they could keep a man awake for that long? What in the hell was this place? The disappearing ghost John and I saw was nothing compared to the ghosts who wouldn't let you sleep. And furthermore, how could Lars stand asleep in there? He sounded angry, not afraid. So what kind of guy prefers the company of ghosts rather than just find somewhere else to sleep? We went back to work, but I was shaken. I talked to the manager and she just kind of blew it off. "Oh, that's just Lars. He's weird and sees weird shit wherever he goes. Don't worry about it." But the whole place had a different atmosphere for me now. I had gone from firm skeptic to a guy that had seen a ghost and heard a man being driven mad by them, all in less than a month. I started looking over my shoulder. I didn't look in the mirror in the stairwell. I began running through darkened areas of the theater when I was alone, heart beating. I was okay as long as someone was with me, but I was terrified to be alone in the building. A couple of weeks went by. The band Heart was playing that night, and I walked past the projector room and through the double doors onto the balcony. There were red curtains covering the concrete wall that used to house the projectors. The curtains still had little cutouts where the projectors would stick out, but now they were just dark holes in a dark wall that led to a room that scared the hell out of me. I went to the railing and leaned over it. The first few people had begun filtering in, ordering drinks and finding their places near the stage or grabbing a spot on the wall to lean into. Some people sat on the speakers and others leaned into the railing, getting ready to light up joints as soon as the place filled up a little more. I liked watching this pre-show shuffle. People watching has always been one of my favorite things. As I watched, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I assumed it was John or another employee, but the pressure increased, and I realized, whoever it was, they were trying to push me off of the balcony. I turned around, shrugging my shoulder downward and out of the grip of whoever was pushing me. I fully expected someone to be standing there, laughing and telling me that they had got me so good. Instead, there was absolutely no one there. I can't describe the feeling of dread, knowing that there were ghosts in the projector room behind me that were slowly driving a man crazy. One of those ghosts had tried to push me off the balcony, and I couldn't even see what had done it. Good God, if something you can't even see could nearly kill you, what the hell was I supposed to do to stop it? Nothing happened the following week, but I was so terrified, I didn't go anywhere by myself unless I absolutely had no choice. I continued running through the darkest areas, and I never went to the edge of the balcony again. I couldn't avoid that projector room, though. The door felt like an actual presence lurking in the darkness across from the bathrooms. One day, John and I were asked to clean out the projector room. Lars had finally moved out and left everything behind. I won't build this up. We didn't see or hear any ghosts in there. I just want to describe this place so you can imagine living here with ghosts haunting you at every moment of every day. John turned the key and pushed the heavy metal door open. The room behind was dark, lit only with a red industrial light that cast a thin, nebulous glow over one corner of the room. Equipment lined the left wall, creating an eerie white noise that was loud enough so you had to raise your voice to be heard. The equipment continued into a corner the light couldn't reach. On the right wall, there was a metal ladder connecting to a catwalk above. To get to where Lars slept, you had to climb the ladder and take the catwalk, which connected to a room encased in 2-foot thick concrete. This encased room had a massive industrial door on it. There was a hanging light bulb with a pull chain in the middle of the room. Its paltry light wasn't much better than the one below, but at least it wasn't red. There was a bed and a dresser and trash everywhere. On the right wall, you could see the dark holes in the encasement where the projectors would shine through. Below these were 2 large pits that the projector sat in. These pits were now home to rodents and who knew what else. John and I looked into the pits with a flashlight and found magazines and newspapers dating back to the 1920s and 30s. What a horrible place to live. Encased in a concrete slab with red light spilling in from the other room, white noise from machinery, strange rodent-filled pits right next to your bed, and ghosts that won't let you sleep. Like I said, we didn't see or hear any ghosts in there, but the feeling of dread would be more than enough to drive me crazy if I had to live in there. Top that off with ghosts shaking your bed and screaming at you, and I can't imagine Lars wasn't absolutely insane. El Perezoso. As the starry night sky caressed the earth, the deafening screams of a young girl faded out with the moon. Her small feet leaving a trail on the soft soil as she's being dragged away from the village, she would slowly disappear into the nothingness of the forest. At that moment, my aunt's curiosity interrupted my grandpa's story. As the crackling of the fire became distant, she gathered enough courage to ask him if El Perezoso really did exist. He then smiled and softly responded, if he did, he didn't want to find out. And with that response, he rushed everyone inside for bed. It would be the last story he shared before his downfall. My aunt was one of 8 children, the oldest being 12, when my grandpa's alcoholism set upon an earthly purgatory to his family. He would lose the family home, cattle, and land, leaving an inheritance of shame and everlasting void. Seeking forgiveness and unable to overcome his sickness, he would wander about the town like a lost soul. My grandma was a strong woman, but life and a series of unfortunate events had beaten that strength into her. A strength that she then beat onto her children, not physically, but with life lessons. She would pack what little they had left, worldly and dignity-wise, and began to work the fields. Hard labor that only men did at the time, but she had no choice. Destiny had ripped fairness away from her at a young age. So even though it was unfair, she didn't think otherwise. She just moved on, only noticing another minuscule piece of her heart missing, yet again. Mary, being the oldest, was in charge of all 8 kids and would tend to all household duties. In a third world country, this meant hauling water from the river, boiling fresh corn, taking it to the mill and making tortillas to eat and to sell. Wet the grounds and sweep, dust the sheets, make the beds, and look after the children. My grandma was pretty good about masking her pain and hurt behind her sweet smile, but my aunt could always sense it. So, out of guilt, she would normally fulfill all chores in a timely fashion. If she didn't, my grandma would always warn her about El Perezoso, reminding her that he was always hunting for people or young children who left things for another day. El Perezoso was described as a small man with troll-like features. These features would hide behind a putrid-smelling beard that would drag the ground. Exhausted from days, turned to months, turned to years, this day was different. My aunt decided to entertain her rebellious nature and hung up her apron. She loathed that apron, like the buzzing of a pesky fly against one's ear or a fresh mosquito bite that had grown 10 times too big. On this day, she kicked her sandals off and sat on the softest hammock in the house. It, of course, had seen better days, but it was as nurturing as any mother's soft embrace. She daydreamed of what life would be like if she wasn't responsible for so many lives, having to keep up with so many chores, a life where maybe she could have been the middle child, or the youngest, or a life where her parents were still together. In mid-thought, she dozed off into a stillness, a kind of quiet she was unfamiliar with. Having 8 siblings, there was never room for silence. A cold breeze swaddled her ever so tightly. It startled her. She jumped up, rolling her ankle. The pain reached the extremity of her soul, but she only had enough strength to exhale a deep sigh of misery. She saw the time. She knew my grandma would be home soon. She ripped a piece of her dress and tightly wrapped it around her ankle. She ran into the kitchen and made herself busy putting on that miserable apron that always seemed to mock her. She got through the tortilla making and somehow managed to convince the younger girls to make the beds. They did as they were told. She thought in mid-grin, maybe I can get away with today. Maybe today my life will change. She felt a cold tickle on the side of her neck, but too many chores left to be bothered by that. Using a clay jug on top of her head and a wrapped scarf for support, my aunt hauled water away from the nearby river. She began to clean the floors. She would use this water to wet the dirt floor and sweep any loose soil. By the time she was done, the girls were also done making the beds. She walked into the bedrooms and checked all the beds. Everything was falling into place. My grandma would be home soon and everything would be done. Except when she walked back into her bedroom, her bed was left intact. It was almost as if someone had ripped all the bedding apart and rolled it up into a looming wad of ridicule for her to unravel. Limping towards her bed, she yells for the girls. No one came. She grabbed the bedding with a force of anger and fury, as if to launch it, but the wad of bedding did not budge. If anything, her hands paused by a mass hiding between her sheets. Something within told her, Mary, do not seek what lies beneath. Yet she took a deep breath, engulfed with desperation, and began to reveal what was lurking. A smell so intoxicating and awful would overcome her, her curiosity pushing her to carry on, unearthing a long, white beard as she was combing through. By the time she realized what it could be and thought to run, it was too late. Whatever was hiding had a tight grip around both her wrists, tugging at her as if trying to swallow her whole. She yelled, screamed, and with each shriek her jaw would unhinge wider, her voice cutting through her throat like broken glass, except no one would come to help. Tears began to roll down her face as she fought to anchor the raw dirt under her feet. Gray, decaying fingernails began to burrow into her skin. She curled her toes and dug her heels deeper with each tug. As his harrowing face and foul beard began to consume her, she knew very well that she would lose this battle. She gave one last shriek, and on that last attempt, she was engulfed in an ocean of darkness. There was no sound, no breeze or air, there was nothing. She only felt the tightness in her throat as there was no life to absorb around her, and her body weakened as his beard wrapped around her and slowly tightened with each attempt she made to survive. It's right before dusk, and my grandma is home from the fields. She sets down her tools, takes off her shoes, and walks straight into the bedroom to grab fresh clothes. In the mirror above her dresser, she can see a visible struggle emanating from the covers. She reaches over and shakes my aunt into consciousness. My aunt is relieved to see my grandma. Confused, but relieved. She tries to convince herself it was only a dream. It was only a dream. It was only a dream. She jumps up only to feel a sting coming from her ankle. And then she sees the burns and bruises around her wrists and feels the overwhelming warmth rolling down her neck as she realizes who had come to see her. Thanks so much for sticking with me, everyone. I appreciate you more than you know. This has been a really amazing outlet for me during this crazy time and has been a really great way for me to keep my anxious mind busy instead of worrying. So please take some time to reach out to me in the comments or email. Send me your stories, your experiences, no matter how big or small. You can send them to me at tftcsub, that's tftcsub at gmail.com. And also check out the links in my video description to listen to more music from such marvelous monsters, our marvelous theme song creators, and my friend Liz on her Instagram page where you can set up your personal tarot reading. I will see you all here again next week, Saturday night at 9 p.m. Central Time. Until then, make sure you say your prayers and check under that bed before you go to sleep tonight.